Character action games as a genre are famous for a lot of things. But they're mostly famous for things like this. Or this.
You know, I try to avoid doing this in my Sunday best.
Or whatever the hell this is supposed to be.
You're batshit insane!
So yeah, they're kinda goofy as hell. It's one of the genre's biggest selling points for a lot of people, and I love these games for that. But because they're so goofy, I feel like a lot of people reduce them to just being dumb fun, which ignores the importance I think the goofiness has in making these games work as an experience. If you're a fan of Devil May Cry, you're probably familiar with the phrase, wacky woohoo pizza man. It's basically used as a shorthand to talk about how over-the-top and absurd the humor and tone of DMC is. If you didn't know much about Dante, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the appeal is ironic, that the cutscenes are just so bad it's good and that people are into it for the meme. But that's only really the case for the first two games, products of their time from the early PS2 age, and boy do they show it sometimes.
Now, I'll absorb his power!
See, Devil May Cry is a very absurd franchise, and sometimes even a really stupid one. But what makes games like this special is that they're not some form of irony-poisoned self-parody. What makes Devil May Cry special is that it's stupid, and it's proud of it. So what exactly does being proud of it mean? At first, it might just seem like a silly distinction. Well, let me put it this way. For a bit of context, there's been a pretty loud division on social media and the internet as a whole regarding the idea that certain parts of the AAA gaming industry are sort of embarrassing themselves to try to get validation from mainstream critics and be taken seriously. Many journalists and developers are afraid that their medium of choice is going to get them ridiculed by the snobbish world of film and art critique, so they're desperate to try and be taken more seriously. This argument's been going on since long before MGS1 came out, and it's only been getting exponentially louder. As you could probably guess, this creates a little bit of a division between people that want more cinematic, artsy experiences and people that prefer more mechanically focused titles that put gameplay first. Personally, I tend to prefer more arcadey/video gamey experiences, but I don't think that games that are story-driven, cinematic experiences are inherently bad as long as they're done well. What I think hurts a lot of these, especially in the Western AAA gaming industry, is that they're obsessed with a pretty pretentious, misaimed idea of what makes a game more cinematic and mature. I'm not going to get too much into sidelining this video since it's a bit off-topic and overused, but there's a reason that studios like Naughty Dog, Quantic Dream, and Telltale have started to come under fire for their storytelling methods. But more importantly, games like Last of Us 2 and Heavy Rain fall into one major trap. They feel like the developers are ashamed of what they're doing, like they don't want to be making a video game. They feel like they're begging you to think that their stories are meaningful and evocative, and it feels like they're asking for validation. It falls into the exact same trap as a little game famous for trying too hard called DMC Devil May Cry. Now, talking shit about Dunk Devil on the internet's pretty much done to death already. At this point, we all know. You know it, I know it. Inferior combat mechanics, inconsistent characterization, sniper rifle abortion scene, cut fedora, regular fedora, bad dialogue, color. You know, I'm not going to bore you with it. So why bother bringing it up in the first place? Well, I specifically wanted to talk about one quote that I hear about the game a lot. It would have been well received if it just wasn't called Devil May Cry. Because I'm not sure I agree with that. See, it's not that the game doesn't have good ideas, some of them are actually pretty cool. The Limbo is a pretty cool location, News Station level's pretty thematically and graphically well executed, some of the weapons are pretty neat. And as far as this guy goes, I think Dante as a character on his own is sort of okay. I mean, he's not awful.
What did you just say?
For example, his design does a pretty good job at what it sets out to do. His voice acting is fine, hell, some of his quips are actually even pretty funny. You know, for what it's worth, I like the greasy punk aesthetic in a vacuum, so other than the fact that he's a replacement for a character I like much more, and the fact that the internet hates him because he spent nearly a decade being a legitimate threat to the continued existence of the original series, why don't I like this guy? Why do I think that his game wouldn't have been able to stand on its own? Well, to put it bluntly, because it never tries to stand on its own. Outside of the combat being kinda jank like Heavenly Sword, the main problem is that Dante's entire existence can be summed up by a studio-mandated requirement to be a twisted mirror image of the original Dante. He was designed, by committee, to be the opposite of the original. And because of that, his existence is kind of left in this sad state where he's just a shallow, twisted parody, and he never really got to be his own character. Just look at this infamous scene. Look at the way that he awkwardly asserts himself as Dante the Demon Killer to a demon that couldn't care less about what he's saying and isn't even paying attention to them. It almost feels like the game is trying to make him look like a pathetic attention seeker. This isn't really a good way to establish a protagonist that you're supposed to care about or think is cool. Look at how the wig scene is clearly contradicted by his double triggered later on in the game, not even that much later on in the game. Look at how heavily the game leans on the original game's names and themes, despite the fact that Ninja Theory claims so often that they wanted to do their own thing. Doomk Devil is a game that spends its entire development cycle and its entire playtime wishing that it didn't exist. It's a cynical game that doesn't really want anything more than to be something other than what it is. It wants to be a Devil May Cry game, but it treats the idea of being a DMC game as something to be mocked. When you create a cynical and disingenuous product, you create a product that can't stand on its own. DMC Devil May Cry is sort of marked forever because of the fact that its entire creation is meant to be a parody of a game series that the developers clearly actually did like because of how much inspiration that their final product takes from it. They were just told that they weren't allowed to do anything that was actually a love letter to the franchise, and instead they had to make something that was only a shell. For as many good ideas as DMC might have, no improvements to the gameplay or narrative could have ever injected a soul into this game. Now, DMC's main series, on the other hand, is a peak example of the opposite effect. These games are obviously superior to the reboot from a mechanical and aesthetic angle, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the part that usually gets people into the franchise for the first time: this. The fact is, from a narrative point of view, most DMC games have pretty basic plots on paper, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a single fan of the series that actively encourages you to skip the cutscenes. And it's not only because the wacky shenanigans are hilarious, awesome, and a core part of the series' identity, but also because characters like Dante, Nero, Virgil, and Lady are some of the most beloved characters in the entire game library of Capcom. I know grown-ass people, multiple grown-ass people, that shed tears at the end of DMC 5. A game where your main protagonist has a DLC weapon that's a vibrator and your legacy franchise protagonist hits people with a motorcycle. And it all boils down to the fact that the creators of DMC as a franchise love this cast as much as the players do. Most of the more serious or heartwarming scenes in the series should be too goofy to take seriously. And in other games, they probably would be. But DMC's sense of charm and whimsy works so well because anytime a character does something that should be too wacky to be cool, it's because the developers genuinely think that this is what being cool looks like. And because they believe it, you better be damn sure that it works. There's a completely unironic passion behind all of it that drives the core of the series. Even in DMC 2, the funny ironic meme game where Dante is angsty and brooding, he's still throwing goddamn coins at people dressed like a dance floor vampire.
King? Yeah. Here's your crown.
Or how about DMC 3? A game celebrated for having this really awesome, raw, climactic theme of this rivalry between two brothers as the central mechanical and gameplay focus. While the final tragic boss fight against Virgil starts with your protagonist saying this line.
And now, my soul is saying it wants to stop you!
And it's practically a Resident Evil line with how ridiculous and cheesy the wording and delivery is. But it works, somehow. It's one of the most iconic moments from the last half of the game. Because at this point you're so deep in with these characters that you're probably willing to buy just about anything. The intense injection of style into everything in the series isn't just the method that Capcom uses to grab your attention, it's also a core part of what gives the games their substance. I once heard it described that every Devil May Cry character is a 12-year-old's idea of what the coolest dude is. And not only is that entirely right, it's absolutely perfect. When you laugh at a Devil May Cry game, the game is laughing with you, and not because it's trying to make fun of itself, but because it's just having a good time. Not every game can work with this tone, and neither can every story, but the goofiness itself isn't what makes Devil May Cry special. What makes Devil May Cry special is the complete sincerity in what it's trying to be. It's the same reason that people love Evil Dead, or why some of the most subversive RPGs of all time are just as much of a love letter as they are a parody. Even then, DMC does have plenty of genuine depth. Dante, for example, suffers from depression. He's lazy and unmotivated about anything other than fighting demons unless it personally involves his close friends or family. He also struggles with his identity as a half-human, and he's scared to get close to anybody because of what happened to his family as a kid, fearing that it might happen again. The only woman he's ever shown interest in also shut him down within the game that she was introduced, so, good going there. Nero also has a great character arc about feeling like he doesn't have enough power to protect those he cares about. Virgil, on the other hand, is a compelling anti-villain who suffers the same inferiority complex as Nero, but doesn't have anybody to protect to keep him anchored down. And then there's Lady, who has a great story about struggling with family. But the games never beg you to pay any attention to all of this. It's all there in the official material. Hell, you don't even really have to look into supplementary material for almost all of it. But the implementation into the wacky hoo-hoo adventures that the characters go on is entirely organic. Because at the end of the day, DMC isn't particularly concerned about trying to force you to take it seriously. But plenty of fans are still able to take it seriously, despite the fact that the games have such a ridiculous tone. Because we want to. It's the same reason Hideo Kojima is such a beloved creator, because despite his games not really making much sense and having a complete lack of subtlety, I'm looking at you, Death Stranding, even then, you're still invested in what he has to say, along with his team, because even if the characters are spouting indecipherable nonsense, and even if the story is not really that good, and even if the gameplay is not really that good, you're still interested in what they have to say because it's clear that they're being completely sincere about all of it. Capcom has a reputation among people in the gaming sphere for having bad stories, or at the very least absolutely ridiculous and cheesy stories. And I don't think this is a bad take, honestly. Because in plenty of ways, let's face it, they do. But there's also a reason that their character lineup is considered to be among the best in the entire industry. There's something important to be said about being confident in your own creations, because that charm and confidence goes a very long way. Because sometimes the thing that makes a story worth experiencing is if the storyteller believes in it.